Welcome to another episode of Up To. 10 years ago, Up To started as a live event series showcasing leaders who are as humble as they are successful. The humility piece is extremely important as we identify leaders who can inspire others. We try to focus our interviews on the non-business aspects of their lives. And in doing so, we have found there's a real thirst to explore their hearts and minds in atypical ways. Our host, as always, is Adam Kaufman. And on this episode, we are joined by our special guest, Dr Shriver.
If you're a business owner, an executive, or a rising member of a management team, I don't have to tell you about the importance of having team members and partners you can trust. A firm that I've worked with for years and have trusted myself to refer my colleagues to is Vivid Front, an award-winning digital marketing, branding, and website development firm based in Cleveland, Ohio, but with clients all over America. Vivid Front's focus is on scaling brands digitally. They create holistic, return on investment-centric strategies and solutions for middle-market companies who want to grow. They do paid advertising, influencer and social media marketing, e-commerce strategies, lead generation websites. I could go on. Their expertise is expansive, and their tactful leadership team, all of whom I know, has the entrepreneurial experience to turn ideas into revenue-producing business plans. Yes, I am reading a script, but I will tell you that I sought Vivid Front out for this podcast because I already believed in them, seeing what they did in the marketplace. So if you're seeking a partner to take your business to the next level, or if you're looking for an opportunity to work for a top agency with an amazing culture, truly an amazing culture, check out their website at vividfront.com or send me a note and I'll introduce you to my friends who run the company there. Vivid Front, great organization. Our guest today has led the Special Olympics International Board of Directors for several years, and together with 6 million Special Olympic athletes in more than 200 countries, promotes health, education, and a more unified world through the joy of sport. He is also the co-founder of Unite, an initiative to promote national unity and solidarity across differences. Our guest joined Special Olympics in 1996. He's been a leading educator who focuses on the social and emotional factors in learning. He co-founded and currently chairs the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning called CASEL, the leading school reform organization in the field of social and emotional learning. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. He's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. He's co-chairman of the National Commission on Social and Emotional Learning. He's president of the Joseph Kennedy Jr. Foundation, member of the board of directors of WPP Group, and he's co-founder of Love and Spoonful Ice Cream Company, which I've noticed, sadly, he didn't bring any of today. He earned his undergraduate degree from Yale University, a master's from Catholic University here in Washington, and he holds a doctorate in education from the University of Connecticut. He has produced 4 films, authored the New York Times best-selling book, Fully Alive, which I reread leading up to today. And he has written for dozens of national newspapers and international magazines. On a personal note, and I've never told you this, Tim, the first time I met today's guest, I was attending a talk where he was speaking about the new Fully Alive book to a group of 25 of us hosted by Ambassador Doug Holliday and his Path North group. Now, to be fully authentic, I will say that I went into that session with some preconceived notions about how much I would be interested or not in this particular discussion. I have, for whatever reason, been in front of many impressive leaders over the years in politics and in business, and I just thought, okay, here's another talk by someone who has a book that he's trying to sell. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much. But Tim, seriously, it was the most impactful hour I've ever seen anyone deliver a talk on, and I have not stopped thinking about it in the 7 years since then. And I've traveled all over the place and have told people that you'll never meet how impactful that 1 hour was. So it really left a mark on me. So it's for that reason, more than even your impressive list of accomplishments, that I'm so thrilled to have you today in studio. Welcome to the Up To podcast.
Thank you for having me, and very kind of you to say all that.
What have you been up to?
Well, first of all, I'm surprised. I'm surprised by your sharing about the presentation on my book. What I'm not surprised at is how effective it is to have low expectations. You come in and you don't expect much, and people are so impressed when they get something much more than they expect. But
you're being humble. It was tremendous.
No,
your passion was just tremendous.
I thank you for that. But in a way, it's an important point because I think sometimes we have low expectations of each other. Sometimes we have low expectations of people in certain categories. And low expectations can become, this is something teachers learn very early on, low expectations can become self-fulfilling. You label a child in 3rd grade or 6th grade or 9th grade, you label that child as troubled or irresponsible or boring or disruptive, and before you know it, the whole year starts to go downhill. So in a way, the work in the Special Olympics movement has taught me this. People have quite low expectations for people with intellectual disabilities. And those low expectations frequently bleed into devaluing expectations. So my joy has been, in part, to be able to tell their stories and surprise people. I like to say, there's a great title by the brilliant 20th century author C.S. Lewis called Surprised by Joy. And I feel like my career, at least my professional life, has been one series after another of experiences where I've been surprised by joy, and it's it never gets old. So anyway, that's not what I'm up to, but that's what your introductory remarks brought out.
Yeah, well, I surprised you with that comment, so I hope it's okay that I was being authentic.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to get people focus real quickly on how impressed I was, because I've had a lot of guests and we've covered a lot of different topics. But one of the things I often ask our guests is, was your career path set out for you early on? A lot of folks grow up in a family where there's one path. You got to be a doctor or you got to be a business owner like Dad was. Your family pedigree is a little different than most families. Were you able to pursue what you wanted to, or was there some nudging in certain directions early on, maybe in high school, or what are you majoring in college? Like, what were those early years of career development like?
Well, I think, the most impactful way in which I was, the most impactful part of my upbringing was the extent to which my parents, the ways in which my parents, both my mom and my dad, engaged all of us, my siblings. I'm the middle of 5 children, so I have 2 older siblings and 2 younger siblings. But we were always engaged in what felt like the work of social change. But we weren't engaged in it in an abstract sense. My mom ran a summer camp for children with intellectual disabilities. We were campers and counselors and arts and crafts station workers. And my dad helped launch the Peace Corps, and we would go and visit Peace Corps sites and work for the day at a Peace Corps site. When I was 16, spent a summer at a Peace Corps site in Guatemala building houses after a devastating earthquake had hit that country in the mid-'70s. So my parents very much emphasized getting in the game, not watching it. Mm-hmm. Which game we decided to get in was more open.
That's good.
But being in the game, in some ways, was not optional.
Engagement.
We had to be, if my mother walked into the house and saw us watching TV, she would sneer and scowl and get on to yourself and what are you doing there? And outside, move, play, get active. My dad, the same way, almost irresistibly active, professionally and personally. So we were, I think the headline was, be a person in the arena. That brilliant Teddy Roosevelt
yeah, it's on the back of all my cards.
Yeah, right. So there was no timid bystander in my upbringing. Having said that, there was a lot of emphasis in my house on politics. There was a lot of emphasis in my house on political action on the large stage. I had obviously most people are aware, senators in my family too, during my lifetime, a president in my early childhood. So there was a great deal of emphasis on political action for civil rights, for human rights, for women's rights, for peace, for fighting poverty, for promoting equity and equality, for education, for healthcare, for deinstitutionalization. The list went on, and my parents were active in all of those areas in many respects. I chose to be active. I chose the path. It really came to me accidentally, but I chose to become a teacher because I was more interested, honestly, in the inner life of change than I was in the political life of
Individual over policy.
I wanted to meet people face to face, and I wanted to understand what was burning within them, what was blocking what was burning within them, what was the pain points, where were the hope points. And so education just seemed like all that story that I saw in the background of civil rights and social justice, and I wanted to see eye to eye, heart to heart, if you will. So I spent the first decade, more than a decade and a half of my career in public education, in urban public education, not because I was obsessed with teaching Shakespeare or the Civil War or the placement of the comma or other kinds of things like that I did teach a little bit, but because I was obsessed with young people and what could happen in a school. Could a school, all of a sudden struck me, a school, you have 13 years of 10 months a year with a child. There's no institution even close to comparable.
You really get your arms around people.
I mean, healthcare, you have the person an hour every 6 months,
reacting
6
to
weeks,
something.
or 3 months, or 6 months. Nothing wrong with it, but it's just struck me that schools were the place that you could have an impact on children, on families, on communities, if you did it right. So that's what drew me into education and drew me into the helping to build the field of social and emotional learning, and drew me really ultimately into my life's work.
Do you think back, were there ever moments though where you were wondering, should I go classroom by classroom, or should I do something different? Should I start a business? I feel like you probably had the skill set where you could have gone several different directions, and you were probably stimulated by outside people professionally flirting with you about different ideas and opportunities. Like, how did you filter through in those early years? A lot of the Up To podcast listeners tell me how they love hearing how people make their career choice decisions.
Well, I did it a lot on gut. I think gut and human relationships. I tell my kids, don't pick a job because of the title, and don't pick a job, and at least initially, because of the compensation. Pick a job because of the person you work with.
Okay.
When I graduated from college, I had a teaching certification, and I was starting to apply to school districts to have an entry-level teaching position. I had worked during the summers before graduating with a guy who was running an after-school, a summer program and a compensatory ed program called Upward Bound.
Oh, yeah.
With students from New Haven and Hartford.
Still exists?
It still exists, yeah. It's fantastic. And this guy was just stunned, just to mesmerize me. When I saw him with kids, I'd talk to a student and say X or Y or Z, and it would go in one ear and out the other. My colleague Bob would walk up, and the kid would just...
like you were with me during that 1 hour talk.
I guess that's right. And he would speak, and young people would listen. I was fascinated. So I was applying. I wrote to Bob. I, in those days, called him on the telephone. It sounds old-fashioned. And said, look, I'd love to work. You know, he said, we only have a part-time job. I said, well, I'll take it. I'll take it if I can get it. Well, you have to interview. So I interviewed, and I got a half-time job working in the Upward Bound program, and I supplemented the rest of my, and then 6 months later, it turned into a full-time job. But I went for Bob. I went to the job because I thought he could teach me what I really wanted to know, which is how to speak in a way that reflected the heart, the soul, the capacity to connect
So you were
with
willing
another
to
human
take
being.
a half-time position, therefore half the money, and maybe it's not the ideal first job, but because of him.
Because of him.
Yeah.
It was really, honestly, it was 100%. I mean, I got another half-time job almost immediately, and, you know, when you're young, you're
You make it
21,
work.
you can
Yeah.
make it work.
Yeah.
I got evening job at a costume store and stuff like that, which was fantastic. So I had a lot of experiences. But I went for him. And the 3.5 years later, I left and to take a 1-year leave of absence. In those days, that's what I thought I was going to be doing, to go to work for Jim Comer at the Yale Child Study Center. He was teaching and writing about the impact, the intersection between psychology and mental health strategies and education. And again, I read his book and I thought to myself, man, I need to learn what this guy understands. He understood families. He understood the friction between schools and families. He understood the tension that parents feel. He was explaining to me how difficult it was for families to feel an affinity with schools. And all of a sudden, I was just lighting up with, oh my God, that's what's going on. And so I knocked on his door. Same thing.
But see, this is your humility. Let me interrupt, because I want to showcase here already two different examples of two different men older than you in your field of desired interest, that you were humble enough to say, I want to learn from these people.
Oh, I wasn't humble enough. I was starving. I saw people that, and I still feel this way, honestly. The groups we've been involved in, I'm in the room with people and I hear this person and I hear that. I'm like, oh my God, listen to him.
They whisper to me about you that way, though. That's the humility again.
That's very kind. But I think especially when you're young, in your 20s and 30s, but I feel this way in my 60s. I gravitate towards people. Much more than to a specific lane. So my career looks like I spent some time in education, then a little bit of time in child development, and then a little time in religion and spirituality, and a little time in disability rights. And people say, well, are you a disability rights advocate? Well, yes, I am. Are you an educator?
One of your hats.
Yes, I am.
Right.
But to me, it's olive thread. I'm interested in how to unlock the gift, as another one of my mentors said, the unimaginable beauty that lies within each of us. We are each more beautiful than we dare imagine, and if we see that in others, it's because we've seen it in some humble way within ourselves, and we can mirror it back to other people. To me, that's when the lights start to flash.
That's the magic, yeah. Now, how did you make the decision? I think a lot of people would know you most with your Special Olympics affiliation.
Sure. Yeah.
Was that a huge decision to take that on full bore?
I mean, it was. I never thought, my mom was there. I was living in Connecticut. I was very happy in the school system. My mom is the founder of the Special Olympics movement. I never saw myself as being in a family business. But I was in my mid-30s, and my wife and I, we had 4 kids. My parents were getting older. And there was some political trouble in the New Haven school system, which I won't go into. And it seemed like there was a moment in which a change might make sense. And so I kind of consciously, and for those people who are in family businesses or have been around family, some families cast a big shadow.
A lot of patriarchs of private businesses.
All that stuff. And I talk to people all the time and say, well, I went into this because my father was in it, but I knew I'd never measure up. We all kind of
that's heavy.
Have that heavy kind of. It's not really humility. It's really self.
It's a weight.
It's a weight, and it's a sense in which it's a lack of self-esteem. I guess that's an overly used term, but. So I thought to myself, and I did this consciously. I thought to myself, if I go to Special Olympics, people are going to say to me, isn't that sweet?
Well, you said people say, that's nice.
That's nice. It's nice.
And that bothered you?
It bothers me, but I knew they were going to be saying it not just about the movement. That made me angry. When they said it about me, I was ready for it. So I kind of, if you will, became aware of the idea that I would be seen by others as a small actor in a family drama. But I knew what I was going for, which was not to be a small...
Your motivation was different.
My motivation was different. So even today, people... Like yesterday, I was at an event. So it was so nice that you've helped carry on the family legacy. That's after 26 years of work. I don't see myself as carrying on the family legacy.
The next generation
but
leader.
I don't begrudge the person who said that to me, and I understand why they said it. And they said it out of extraordinary respect for my mom and my dad, and who I love to death. So it's all good. I just had to know from within myself what I was doing so that I wouldn't be excessively buffeted by feeling diminished, or the psychological term is infantilized by the perception that would exist around that work. So, these are, to be able to hold your own within a family structure to love it but not need it, to be a part of it, but also to have one's own sense of identity separate from it. These are, tensions that we all face. That because families are always moving, right? The one constant in a family is it's changing.
And even though your mother started this, you probably were going to be making your own mark, and maybe you would make decisions within the quote business unquote of Special Olympics to do it a little bit differently. Yeah. And there's a weight that comes with that. Well, here's how we used to do it.
Yeah.
Dr. Shriver.
Yeah. Well, you do. I mean, any chief executive has that responsibility, and I had it no differently than others. I did do one thing which I feel was the right thing to do. A lot of chief executives will come in and say, "That was then, this is now." We got to get rid. There were so many problems. You hear this all the time. I took over the company, and I found out that nothing was working here, and that the numbers were wrong there, and that the people were misplaced there, and that somebody'd been hired, and there was contracts galore. Mm-hmm. And, I had to clean the whole damn thing up. Well, I felt like the leadership message I wanted was this movement is enormously strong, and our challenge is to make it stronger. Mm. And I don't think that diminished the importance of my role, but it didn't enhance my role at the expense of the role of my predecessors.
The movement's bigger than the current CEO.
That's right. And the movement is as big as we can make it now, but to make it big, we don't have to dump on the people that came before us.
Good. Yeah.
And I think this is part of what I
That's
also...
a rare mentality.
Well, one of the reasons it's rare is because we don't really have in our culture, in my view, we don't have much of a culture of respect for elders. Mm. Indigenous communities, many other communities have an enormously important role for elders. We tend to be like out of sight, out of mind. Like as soon as you retire,
and we kind of
change
laugh
the
at
nameplates
older people.
and...
Yeah.
If somebody said, if you go to a big company and say, "Oh, I knew the CEO in the 1990s," they'll be like, "We don't even know who that is. Mm-hmm. Who did you know?" Or
right.
Or by the way, that's not what we do anymore. Here's who's in charge now. Or here's who controls the budget today. I get it. I get that we have to move on, but I felt like the strength of a movement like Special Olympics, in part, was going to draw from the extent to which people saw themselves as in a line of great thinkers and believers and actors and change agents, not as breaking away from the greatness of the past, but actually standing on the shoulders of great people. And so I tried to lead the organization from that perspective. Doesn't mean we didn't make big changes. We have, and we did, and the movement will make big changes when I'm gone. I hope, but it doesn't have to make those changes by humiliating our predecessors.
What you're describing kind of reminds me of the church model and how elders in a church, they create some continuity from the past.
That's right.
And we should be deferential to these elders, and usually there's their titular position that's respected. Right. It kind of reminds me of that. And in a company, you're right. A new CEO comes in, a new board of directors come in. Sometimes changes are made just because they want to make their mark.
That's right.
But there's not a lot of continuity unless you're at the more subordinate level of the workers who've stayed constant. It's almost, or even like the U.S. State Department. If there's a new Secretary of State, but the desk workers stay the same.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But the desk workers typically have to be insulated from leaders because they don't want to be buffeted every 20 minutes by a new leader, right? Which I understand. Same thing happens in schools. A lot of teachers, well, here comes the new fad. The mayor wants this, or the new superintendent, new principal wants this, wants that, some fad. Mm-hmm. The teacher's just like, keeps my door shut. I'm not going to get buffeted by all that. I get it. But what we miss sometimes in looking backwards is the bigger picture. Because somebody in their 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s tends to see the world a little less as a function of the moment and a little bit more a function of the bigger ideas that are in play. What's the longer arc of change here? That's a really valuable gift to have.
You don't want to blow that off, that institutional history.
And just, how do I see this a little higher altitude? Where do I fit in the American story? Not where do I fit in the Virginia story or the podcast story or the Special Olympics story in my case, but where do I fit in the American story, in my tradition, in the Catholic story, or the Baptist story, or the Muslim story, or whatever. Where do I fit in the planetary story? How do I become an agent of hope and change for people around me that will be 3 or 4 or 5 generations from now?
Legacy, a little bit. Impact.
Impact,
legacy.
Right. And who was the potato farmer who in 1840 was, struggling to feed himself or herself in Ireland? Who is still giving that gift to me of the resilience and the strength and the grit to pick up his family.
How do you think you're doing with that question? You think you're doing pretty well?
I love to live in it. You know, I think it's a big distinguisher, because I think, especially now, people are reactive in the moment. Did you see what happened today? Breaking news. What the breaking news half the time is,
an update from yesterday.
Yeah,
about
an update from yesterday
about
somebody who, the quarterback didn't sprain his ankle. He broke his ankle.
Or Twitter news.
Yeah. So I think pulling back a little bit, I think it's good for the soul. I'm sure of that. I think it's good for the mind. People are so battered by distraction and anxiety, and I understand why. Sometimes just a deep breath and a shutting down of the immediate story and the tapping into the bigger story. But this is what grandparents do for us. This is what elders do for us. So I just feel like in organizations, it's important not to throw them out.
I'm grateful that Calfee, Halter, and Griswold has once again agreed to partner with us. With offices in Ohio and Washington, D.C., this full-service national law firm focuses on all aspects of business and the law, including corporate and finance, intellectual property, and government relations. Let me be clear. I actually approach companies with whom I would like to partner. We just don't accept marketing dollars from anyone. I have been referring my CEO and entrepreneur friends to Calfee for years. I really believe in the firm. One of their notable practice areas is in mergers and acquisitions. And recently, for instance, I introduced a successful entrepreneur in the Midwest to Calfee when he told me that a European-based conglomerate wanted to buy his business. Calfee works with large corporations as well as privately held companies throughout the U.S. and Canada, and in Europe and Asia too. So whether it's selling your own business or the more routine needs of creating your first will or anything in between, this firm can really do it all in terms of legal needs. Once again, the firm is Calfee, Halter, and Griswold, and you can find them at calfee.com or on the Up2 Foundation website. I was preparing for today. I saw your commencement address at Georgetown, and you talked about the value of being silent in the morning. So how did you learn how to be silent? That is such a rare activity in today's world. What does being silent do for you? I've been on a silent retreat before. Just to experience here with you for a moment, I was intimidated by the idea of being silent for 4 nights. And it was this Catholic retreat in southern Louisiana, rural Louisiana. And at my table, Tim, and even at the meals at the table, it was silent. But at my table was Tom Benson, the then owner of the New Orleans Saints. He's passed away now. And also the editor of the Times-Picayune newspaper. And I thought, if those big guys can be silent, little old me, I can put my phone down for a few days. But it was, again, an exercise in humility. But what does silence do for you on that daily basis, if that's part of your morning ritual?
Yeah. Well, silence.
And ironically, we're going to be talking about silence on the show.
Yeah, we're talking about silence.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think, I'm going to say something that's going to sound arrogant. I think that the practice of silence is an essential practice for opening up the best within yourself and in others. Now you say, well, there's a lot of other things. I like nature, or I like television, or I relax by
books,
therapy, books, yoga, many other things, and they're all wonderful. I'm not putting any practice that people have in their lives down. I don't know of any tradition, certainly any of the great traditions, the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Jewish tradition, the Muslim tradition, the Christian tradition. They all seem to point at certain points to the practice of silence as
That's true.
center of transformational energy. Now, why is that? I'm not going to try to describe it excessively, except to recommend it. The tradition I learned in my 20s was called centering prayer, but there's Christian meditation, there's yogic and Buddhist mindfulness kinds of schools, and transcendental meditation, and many other. There are many traditions. There's whirling.
Yeah, TM is really big in the business world now in Wall Street. Transcendental meditation.
Yeah. There's many of these. The one thing they have in common is trying to release the thoughts of the mind and withdraw to a space which is either God or silence or emptiness or whatever. It's a fundamental detachment strategy so that you can disengage from the immediate thoughts, the discursive mind, the binary mind, the dualistic. There's a lot of different words. But you pull back from the mind energy and tap, open, listen for the heart energy. The heart energy.
Heart energy.
It is very fragile. That part of our collective experience, the soul. People have different words, but it's not discursive. It's not words. Words split. This is a cup. This is a table. They're not the same, right? So I'm separating. These are glasses. This is a book. This is a phone. This is a pen. My mind is working really well when it does that. But it doesn't tell me the full story of you and me. It doesn't tell us the full story of what we're hoping for out of life, that part of my thinking. That has to come, one of my teachers, Cynthia Bourgeault, says, not to see wholeness, but to see from wholeness. So the lens has to change if we want to see the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. And I think silence is I dare say, a proven strategy for equipping us to see from wholeness, not just to see from the parts.
One of my favorite Catholic thinkers talks about it in terms of collapsing within oneself. And the visual of that collapsing within oneself helps me because I'm not good at the silence. My wife actually teaches Christian yoga. And I am so bad at turning off my mental to-do lists. And that's horrible of me. It sounds like you've created a good practice of turning off your busy to-do list for the day.
It's not horrible of you. All I would suggest...
Can you call my wife and tell her?
And a lot of people may have heard me say, well, how dare you? I don't like silence. It doesn't work for me. I have friends. You went on a silent retreat, Tim. I was like, yeah, it was. I couldn't last 3 minutes.
Right.
I couldn't last 5 minutes. And I'm not judging, God forbid, I'd be judging, but I'm not suggesting that what I'm saying here is necessarily good advice for everybody. All I would say is that your list mind... if even for, and I'm going to say this, and maybe it won't make sense, if even for one breath, and I mean literally one breath, if you can let the mind that's making the list just release it for one good breath, I think you won't find that you're, as you said, horrible of you to be all in the list. You'll just find that the list is now a part of you, not all of you.
That's good coaching. And that's encouragement. That's similar to what our mutual friend Doug Holliday said. He said, start small. Try to get to 1 minute. You don't have to do it for a half an hour. Start with an app.
I can do 20 minutes twice a day, and I might get one good breath.
Okay, so you're human. You're still working at this.
Might get, I mean, this has been the advice I've given to myself, and I'm sitting there and I'm in my 15th minute and I'm still making lists and I'm still reminding myself of why such and such is a jerk, and I'm still thinking to myself, you're not going to get this done because you're too stupid. And I'm still thinking to myself, you have never been able to plan or react or talk to your kids the right way. I'm still making all my lists. And then I get one good breath. And I thank God.
It's good encouragement. One of the things you're also working on is I was reading a little bit about dignity and the Dignity Index.
Yeah,
I hadn't
just
heard
launched
about
last week.
Yes.
We just launched it.
Okay,
it's
so
4 days old.
Why does dignity matter, or why is it underappreciated?
Well, I think we've created a culture in which it pays to be hateful and contemptful to other people. It makes you famous. It makes you rich. It makes you powerful. The angrier and the more divisive you are, the more likely you are to get tweets followed, the more likely you are to get picked up by other people. And so we've created an incentive structure that rewards, if I can say this, the most divisive parts of our nature.
That's true.
But most people don't realize they're guilty of the problem. They mostly say, you know, those people,
Yeah.
they're ruining the country. They're uneducated, or they're elitists, or have no values, or they have no faith, or they have no intelligence, or they have no decency, or they have no honesty, or they're demagogues. Now, all of those things we say about other people, but we don't realize how contemptful our language is. How much, and people say, well, no, I don't hate them. They're just horrible people. So what we're trying to do is awaken people. This is a little bit like a silence trick. Pull back just a little bit and see what you're doing. So you become the viewer. You become the director of the movie, not just the actor in it.
Who's the we in this dignity?
This is our small team at Unite. It's led by my colleague Tom Rawshert, who's a brilliant writer and great speech writer.
So the group Ignite is doing this dignity.
Unite.
Okay.
Although Ignite would be a good term for it. We have our colleague who's running the project. It's a small pilot in Utah right now. We're evaluating speech in the congressional and the Senate races in Utah starting late last week.
Okay.
So we're going to rate speech not according to its policy dimensions, not according to where you are on abortion rights or reproductive rights or immigrant rights or faith-based issues or religious freedom or education choice or whatever it is. None of that. Just on the extent to which the speech you use to describe your opponent is either leans toward hatred and contempt or it leans toward unity and dignity. And what we have found, even in a few weeks, and I'm just playing around with this, is when people see the scale and they start to use it, the first thing that happens is they go home and they talk to their son or their wife or their husband or their neighbor or their cousin or their caretaker in a different way.
That's progress right there.
That's right. So we're hopeful that just a little awareness of the power of the extent to which hatred and contempt have overtaken the way we think we solve problems. Because you ask people, how are we going to solve the problem? Let's just pick a problem, doesn't matter, immigration, whether you're on the right or the left.
I was going to say male hair loss, but yeah,
okay, male pattern baldness, you can say that. But on political issues, most people have an unstated theory of change. And their theory of change is, on immigration, we will solve the problem when I destroy the opposition. And on divisive issues, that means that you're out to get at least 40%, maybe sometimes it's 50% of the country. And you're out to prove them to be fools, imbeciles, whatever word you want to use. And what we don't realize is that theory of change is almost guaranteed not to work.
I like the big idea. It reminds me a little bit of how the Pinocchio index, or like the truth.
Yes, right.
The truth measurements,
right.
Left or right.
That's right.
Is this factually accurate?
That's right. And those have been, I think, quite helpful.
Yeah.
They don't demand that Joe Biden or Donald Trump behave differently, but they hold us to some extent accountable as voters,
right,
for looking at the truth of what's being said. The political figure just said that X is 10%. The question is that true? Mm-hmm. Is he or she actually citing a statistic that's accurate?
That's right. That's the word I was looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact checkers have their role. We're the contempt checkers.
You're the the golden rule.
That's right.
We're trying. Do unto others as you want done to you. It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that, but it's even more important now, as I say, because I think we can't solve problems of the whole without having the whole work to solve the problem. So if we think we're going to solve the problems like immigration or any of these big issues by splitting the country in two and throwing half of the country into the ocean, it's just not going to work. I mean, you don't have to be idealistic here. We don't have to be religious. We don't have to be spiritual. We don't have to be nice. We just have to be practical. So it's not working.
Then the goal would be to have you're testing it right now with the Utah elections, other states or other
We're
municipalities or
hoping,
news agencies will take
you
this
heard it
on?
here first. We're
Yes.
hoping in 2024 to have a full-blown national capacity to evaluate. And if we get the machine learning on this right, you'll be able to pick up, the school board hearing in Missoula, Montana, and see what people said last night and see how it rates.
I love
that. I don't know if we'll get there in 2 years, but that's our
Well, it's a
hope.
big idea. I mean, you're a big idea human being, and you're blessed with a big idea platform. So at least you're using it for some really big ideas.
I think everybody in the country right now, I'll say this might sound a little arrogant, I think we all have to put our effort into finding ways to solve problems with dignity. I don't know whether this is going to be the one that works or not. I believe it can. But we need everybody on this one.
Well, speaking of solving problems, I was asking someone I really respect earlier today, what's a good question I should ask you? And his question to me, I like the question. That's why I'm willing to ask it. Your work for so many years with the Special Olympics movement, that's a big problem you were trying to solve or a big subject you're trying to address. Do you think we've improved in America? I'll just stick with America.
Yeah.
In that category, how far along are we? How much more do we have to do?
Well, I like, John Lewis, the late, great John Lewis said, if you don't think things have changed, you haven't lived my life.
Yeah.
That's
Civil
also
rights congressman from Georgia.
That's right. Who was beaten mercilessly during his younger years and imprisoned and so on. In the field of intellectual disability, look, when I celebrated my 10th birthday, there were 200,000 Americans in institutions for life.
200,000.
1969. We had more people living and put into institutions for life because of their disability than at any other time in our history, more than during the eugenics period of the early 20th century, more than during World War II, when the influence of the Nazi hatred and venom was leaking into this field of intellectual disability. Today we don't have any. Virtually no one lives in an institution. Certainly no one lives in an institution the likes of which we had in the 1950s and 60s and earlier than that. In those days, almost no one with, let's say, Down syndrome went to school. And if they did go to school, they went to an isolated or secluded school, a segregated school. Today, the vast majority of people with Down syndrome or Williams syndrome
Public
or autism
schools, yeah.
go to public schools.
Right.
In those days, there was no jobs, there was no residential communities, there were very little in the way of recreational hopes and supports. There was very little in medicine even, So we've made a lot of progress. But we have a long way to go. I was just talking to colleagues up in New York, and in the New York City schools, there is still a district that is exclusively a segregated district for children with special needs. Just is not optimal. It's just not the best way to educate a child, and it's certainly not the best way to educate children who don't have disabilities about the diverse human family we live in, to be so afraid of having them grow up with their peers that we isolate them from them. I mean, think of the lesson, right? Those people are so different, they can't come to my school. They're so different, I shouldn't play with them. They're so different, they don't belong where I belong.
That's one of the things you taught me is the joy that non-special needs, and forgive me if I'm not using the right words, kids can gain from being around the special needs kids.
I mean, we're all freed by understanding and believing that we're all gifted and we're all blessed. I mean, it is the great freedom. And to know that not only is everyone else sacred, but so are we. And someone needs to tell us over and over again that there's no boundary here. God, I mean, if you put this in religious language, every person is a manifestation of God's grace.
I was thinking that in my head. I didn't want to.
Well, I mean, look, I don't know whether your audience likes that language or doesn't.
That's who you are, though.
It's
That's great.
who I am. And if you don't like the language, you can say every person deserves dignity or every person deserves their rights.
We're all creatures of God.
We're all temples of the Holy Spirit. That's my dad's language.
Okay. I'll defer to your father over me on the show.
But the point is, it's liberating to believe that.
You're right.
it's liberating for all of us. So to see, when we do these, we have unified sports teams now. We call unified sports. Half the team has an intellectual challenge, the other half doesn't. So they're playing basketball for their local high school. And when they have the pep rally, and the school is all in the gym, and the Special Olympics team charges in, and the guy who's 5'2" with Down syndrome charges in his varsity jersey playing because he's ready for the basketball game. The kids go nuts. And the cheerleaders go nuts, and the band goes nuts, and even the teachers are like beaming, because here's this guy, and he's telling you, everybody in this school, look at me.
With utter joy.
I am as gifted and as excited and as joyful as anybody. Why are you trapped behind that wall of fear and anxiety? Crack yourself. I'm not putting words in that young man or young woman's mouth, but I can tell you, the healing that comes to all of us from welcoming those who we think we can't, who we think just in the back of our heads, not that guy.
Uncomfortable, right.
Not that guy. Because when you shut that guy out, you shut a little part of yourself out. And when you welcome that guy in, all of you gets in. So we think this is the central urgency of our time is to educate and promote this sense of universal dignity. So we're trying to do it in Special Olympics. We're trying to do it with the Dignity Index. We're trying to do it in many different ways, and I'm just really excited to be in this work. Well,
your passion just exudes, throughout every sentence of this summary here. I wanted to ask you a little bit about a slightly different topic, technology. Most of my time is spent in technology, my day job, so to speak, and in venture work. And I read an article where you were quoted about the positive aspects of technology, AI specifically, in helping to address the teaching shortfalls in America in terms of number of teachers. And I was a little bit surprised to see you there, but maybe the journalist came to you because you're an expert in education, which therefore makes sense. But how do you think about technology?
Well, I think the great gift of technology from an educator perspective is the capacity to personalize. Okay. If you and I were in a math class together and we're both doing long division, we may learn it in a very similar way, but we may learn it in very different ways. And I may slow down when it comes to the third digit in the long division, and you may speed up when you get to that part. And when I slow down and you speed up, what invariably happens is I go, uh-oh, I'm not as smart as Adam. And Adam raises his hand. He's got the answer earlier than I do. And I go, uh-oh. And they say, well, how did you do? Well, I'm still on number 4 out of 10. You finished all 10. Now, what invariably happens is the normative, the teacher's trying to hold the group together. She or he has 30, 25, 30 kids, right? So Adam finishes. A couple other kids finish. I didn't finish. The teacher is forced to move us on as a group.
Or slow down,
slow down
to help the people not yet done, and that hurts the people already done.
That's correct.
Another problem.
Yep, absolutely. What technology can do is complement the relationships in the classroom, the dynamic between teacher and student, with the capacity to personalize or individualize.
Okay. Yeah.
So the teacher can say, okay, Adam, great, class, great. Tim, I'm plugging you into, here's your password. I want you to spend a few minutes here, and all of a sudden a screen pops up from me that finds what I've done, looks at the mistakes I've made, and helps me see, goes back maybe 2 or 3 steps, and realizes that I'm having trouble with my 9s or trouble with my 6s.
More customized learning.
Yeah. And then I can maybe catch up if in the ideal world. But if I don't catch up, I can continue to follow that path, that more individualized path that will help me learn math at the pace at which optimizes for me. Now, so I think that's the great risk is that technology can find us enclosed in our screens and robbed of the human dimension of learning, which is the source code of everything that matters.
Right. I recently was asked at Oberlin College in Ohio, the Entrepreneurship Center asked me to guest teach one class one day on private equity because I'm in venture capital. And I said, private equity, that's such a boring topic. They can just Google and come up with countless articles about private equity. I said, I like to talk about relationship equity. And the director was like, relationship equity, what is that? Like, I just created something brand new, relationships.
Sure.
And so I tested these themes in this 1 hour session. And I didn't know how these sharp, Oberlin's a good school, these really sharp kids, I didn't know how they would take it. They stood in line for like an hour. I'm not trying to be boastful, but rather to prove your point. They stood in line for an hour to ask me follow-up questions because no one's teaching them about relationships.
Right. Because they saw in you someone they wanted. It's just like what I said at the beginning. They see in you someone, my God, that guy knows something. I want to know. Where is he going? Can I work for him?
So I was glad, but it's sad. There's a thirst for learning about relationships in the digital age.
That's right.
Back to this question about technology and teaching.
Well, that's why we think what we call social and emotional learning, SEL, is so important.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about
that. In SEL, we actually teach children listening skills. We teach children feelings identification skills. We teach children stress regulation skills. We teach children how to create plans for themselves that will minimize. I was in a class just 2 weeks ago in New York where the teacher was doing an orientation, and part of the orientation was to have everyone identify their pet peeves. So you have on the wall, this was about 16 kids in the class, everybody has identified their pet peeve, things that really trigger them. And then the room collaborates in identifying strategies to respond when a pet peeve is done. So someone says, well, my pet peeve is when people don't listen to me.
So how do you cope with that?
How do you cope with that? How do you strategize around it? In that particular classroom, they're building a sense of trust between the students that I can say, I have a pet peeve. You can help me figure out what I can do if that happens in class. And as a result, I look at you as someone I trust and value because you've heard me and you've responded to me at the level that matters to me. Now, that's something that never happened when I was in school.
Right.
And a lot of the kids you're describing at Oberlin aren't hearing that lesson taught because they're not hearing how to do that in the workplace. They're not listening. They're not learning how to be active listeners. They're not learning how to manage stress. They're not learning how to speak with agency but without hostility. I mean, these are all things that you can actually teach. So we think this is really important for this day and age because trust is the coin of the realm, and we don't have much of it now. We got to build it back up. The way to build trust is first to build relationships.
And the dignity that you're working on, so many exciting things.
Yeah.
What are you looking out towards in the future, maybe a little bit longer term? Like, what are you most excited about longer term, not next month or what you're doing this afternoon? What excites you?
I mean, I'm so excited. I mean, people think I have ADD. I don't really have ADD, but I do have a lot of curiosity about the future. Look, Adam, I think our religious traditions are going to be reinvented in the next 100 years. I don't think we're going to lose them, but I think they're going to change dramatically. I can't wait. I can't wait to see the emergence of a deeply spiritual, almost mystical Christianity as the norm, not as the weirdo off in some monastery, but as the norm. I can't wait to see the emergence of a mystical Judaism and the ways in which those kinds of traditions will speak to each other in a whole new way. Because they'll speak to each other from the soul energy, not from the doctrine energy. If I'm Jewish and you're Christian, all we have been trained to think of is I like Jesus, or you like Jesus, I don't like Jesus, or I like Moses, you don't like Moses.
Yeah, pretty binary.
Yeah, the future won't be that way. It can't be that way. It's impossible. So I think there'll be a new politics. I think this country is headed to try to build the first ever multi-tribal democracy in which tribes don't hate each other.
Wouldn't that be great? I was with this impressive CEO last week out at Stanford. We took some leaders out to spend time in Palo Alto, and he was the former CEO of JetBlue and the former CEO of Trammell Crow, this big real estate firm.
Sure.
And he has 31 grandkids, and I'm just listening to this gentleman, Joel Peterson's his name. I don't know if you ever met him, but you look at him and you think, like, this is the type of human being that should be in public policy in the U.S. Senate, helping us solve problems. Listening to you, I know a lot of people have told you that. I feel like the sharpest people in America choose not to be in politics, but maybe you're painting this picture in the future where policymakers will be among the brightest in America.
I hope so. I mean, we need good people in politics, and there are many good people in politics.
Yes.
Right now, the system sub-optimizes their performance. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
that's to put it mildly.
and you have friends there, and
we
I know
want to
people
see
that-
a kind of a politics that takes the average elected official and makes them great, and takes the great elected official and makes them era-defining. But right now, it's hard to see that, and so we've got to we've got to build a constituency for good political leadership too.
That's true.
So what I would say, if I were asking anybody to do anything, when you see hate-based speech in political discourse, turn it off, and when you see it on a candidate that you support, write to the candidate and ask them to stop. And when you see it in a candidate that you don't support, tune them out. And when you see it from the media, whether it's right-leaning or left-leaning, when you hear hatred and vitriol and contempt and arrogance about the other side, turn it off. That's the most powerful thing we can do. You watch it, you pay for it, you make it worse.
Well, you are the opposite of making something worse. It seems like everything you get involved in gets better, including this program. So, Tim, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
It's always.
Can I close with one quick thought, because you asked me about humility.
Yes.
And I was I can't remember the text, but about a month and a half ago I was in church, and the homilist chose to preach on humility. And to make a long story short, he said, everybody talks about humility as knowing your limits, respecting others, and not putting yourself forward. But he said humility is also, and he had some derivative of the term, humility is also knowing your gift. That real humility is knowing your gift and knowing the limits of your gift, but not exchanging one for the other.
Okay.
And in my view, that's how humility becomes a quality that can create, instead of becoming a doormat, becoming a doorway. Because you have the strength to know of your own capacity to open doors to other people.
Right.
But
things
the
we're good at.
humility to know that it's not about you.
For sure. Yeah.
Anyway, I hope
a
you
great
get
reminder.
many, many guests that bring that kind of quality to the discussion, and that
Well,
your
you
listeners
have
will resonate.
really upped the standard for that. So thank you for being with us today, and wishing you the best in all your continued work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Up To podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe via your podcast platform of choice. To receive our newsletter, suggest speakers, and give your candid feedback, please email Adam directly at adam@uptofoundation.org. We would love to hear from you. The Up To podcast is produced by the BL Media Group right outside of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. See you next time.